Hey guys, on a recent video, somebody commented that in the recent World Happiness Report, Japan had come in 55th, and he said he was surprised and would we make a video about it. So I responded to him and said I wasn't surprised and I'd make a video about it to tell you why I wasn't surprised. So this is that video. Just before I go on, when I looked it up, and he mentioned too, Finland was #1, and then it's Sweden and Norway, so there's 4 Northern European countries came in first, and those guys always seem to come in first. If you look at any sort of studies on the best education system or the best healthcare system or the best justice system, almost always those Northern European countries, the same 5 or 6 Northern European countries, seem to always come in first. So perhaps we should be looking at those countries to learn from when it comes to these sorts of things. But anyway, I digress. Japan came in 55th. And the reason it doesn't surprise me is it's just not something that people seem to talk about or think about or just be aware of in Japan. You know, if I was actually imagining the survey, if you said to a Japanese person, "Are you happy in your life?" I actually laughed when I thought about that question because the average Japanese person would never have heard that question before, probably, and would be quite surprised and taken aback and sort of baffled as to why you'd ask such a question, probably. With some exceptions, all these things are generalities and with some exceptions, but I think pretty good chance you walk up to some Japanese person, whether it's someone you know or someone you don't know, and say, "Tell me, are you happy in your life?" I think you'd find they'd be really taken aback by the question, and then if they did answer, I'm pretty sure they'd say futsu, which is like average or normal, or futsu is normal, average, it's okay sort of thing. I'm pretty sure most Japanese people, if you asked them, they'd be the 2 reactions. First one is they'd be surprised at the question. Second one would be, oh, just normal, futsu, average. You know, it's just not something Japanese people focus on. It's not something they talk about. It's not something they think about. It's more about obligation. Some of you might remember I made a video years ago called something and suffering, enduring and suffering, or something like that. And that's sort of the way Japanese people see life. Is like it's difficult, and that it has to be difficult. And if you were to focus on your happiness above your obligations and responsibilities, that's the other thing they say all the time, is giri, obligation. And if you were to put your happiness above your obligations and responsibilities and that sort of thing, and talk about your own happiness, they'd see it as being self-centered or selfish. You know, I was talking to someone here, a Japanese person here recently, about food, and because they sort of see that adults who are fussy about their food, they sort of see that as being childish. And I was explaining to this Japanese guy, I said, you'd probably find in most countries outside Japan, people would just consider that what you like to eat and what you don't like to eat is your business. It doesn't affect anybody else, and it's okay to be fussy. But you could see by his expression he didn't really get it, because they just sort of see any sort of focus on yourself, what you like or don't like, or what you want or don't want, they sort of see as being selfish behaviour, because they see it that we're supposed to focus on the good of the group and the good of everybody else, and that any sort of focus on our own self or our own happiness or anything else would be considered to be self-centered. And so they just don't seem to think about it. They don't seem to talk about it. I introduced it into our house, and I actually use the phrase, because usually my wife and I only speak Japanese, but I introduced the phrase happy house. When we come to making decisions and things like that, often I'll say to her, happy house, you know, and just to try and keep the focus in our house on that's what we want. We want happiness in the house, but I wouldn't try to use that outside the house. If we were doing something with another group of people, or if we were going to a festival, or, you know, we're waiting in line to go somewhere in the car, or, you know, waiting in line outside a restaurant or anything like that, you know, she wouldn't want to hear it. She wouldn't want to hear it, anything about our happiness outside the house. Inside the house, I can usually pull it off as long as it doesn't affect anybody else. She sort of gets that's my focus, is that my focus is on a happy house, but it doesn't come naturally to her, you know, because to her it's not something you think about. you know, you do what you have to do and you do your obligations and responsibilities. And we're just about to have 2 weeks of school holidays here between grades. So they finished whatever grade they were just doing, and then they've got 2 weeks, and then they start their next grade, right? Which in a lot of countries would mean in that 2 weeks there'd be nothing, there'd be no school stuff at all, no homework or anything, because they're about to start a new grade. But here, they'll have spring vacation homework, and they'll have juku, you know, they go to the juku. I'm going to make a video about that soon, the juku thing, because it gets up my nose, the juku thing, but that's another video. But juku is like a private tutoring school that they go to, or club activities from school, or all sorts of stuff like that. And it's just what they do, you know, and we'll see my kids' friends or family friends will come and I'll say, what are you doing in the holidays? Oh, juku, club. They don't sort of think about, I mean, there's exceptions, you know, there's exceptions. There'll be families that are going off to Tokyo Disney, or, you know, people do fun stuff, and, you know, and you do, and some people here are definitely happy and having a good time, but it's just not the focus. It's just not the focus. In a lot of the cultures that we come from, it's sort of like the number one focus, isn't it? Our happiness. And as the other thing I was thinking, the difference would be the response. If you said to somebody in outside Japan, if you said to one of your family or friends, I'm really not happy in my job, what would they say, do you think? They'd probably say, quit, wouldn't they? Quit. Get another job, you know, you only live once, all that sort of stuff, you know. If you're not happy there, you should leave and get another job. And, you know, that'd be the response we'd get outside Japan, wouldn't we? In Japan, if I said to one of my friends or family, I'm really not happy in my job, they'd say, genbare, right? Genbare, do your best. Genbare, gaman suru, you know, or shoganai, it can't be helped. So they'd say, do your best. They'd say, endure, gaman. Gaman, hear it all the time. Gaman suru. Gaman suru means endure. Endure, or be patient, maybe, depending on the circumstance. But that's their thing. Do your best. Be patient. Endure. And shogunai. It can't be helped. It can't be helped. And that's their thinking. Whereas we'd be going, right, what's the solution to this? You're not happy in the job. What do you need to do to make the job that you are happy? What do you need to change to be happy in that job? Or quit and get another job. You know, that's the sort of thing we'd be looking for, wouldn't we? Trying to find a solution. Whereas here, shogunai, it can't be helped. It's just the way it is. You know, and that's sort of pretty much across the board. So, you know, when you've got that sort of environment where focusing on your own happiness is not a cool thing to do, and people won't support you if you try and do it, and no one will understand if you try to do it, and no one else is doing it. That's the other thing. If you ask most people here if they're happy in their jobs, most of them would say no, probably. And it's you know, the upside and the downside of Japanese culture. I mean, the upside of this sort of thinking is that group happiness thing, and not rocking the boat, and everybody just doing their best, and, you know, there's upsides to that. But the downside of that, you know, it's a society where selfish behavior is shunned. Being aware of, you know, thinking about yourself is shunned, which means there's a lot of good things about that, because we're not living next to selfish people, which is one of the reasons why it's a good place to live. However, the downside of that is you can't be selfish, and it's just not cool. You won't get support if you're Japanese friends or family or wife or husband, or, you know, Japanese people won't support. Even my kids, they've grown up in Japan, they're Japanese, you know, and if my behaviour or my thinking is a bit selfish, they'll react to it. They don't like it. You know, if we're going somewhere and I'm sort of saying, come on, let's do this and go to that, they don't like it. If anything that we do might be at the expense of somebody else, they don't like it. It's selfish. It's their natural reaction. And the focus on my happiness, I want to do that because it'll make me happy. You know, and obviously, you know, we can see, can't we, the upside and the downside of that. So the people around us are not selfish, that's a good thing, but the downside is that a lot of people here aren't real happy in their jobs. They're not really happy in what they're doing, because it's not their focus. You know, you hit what you aim for, don't you? If your focus in life is to be happy, you know, and that's what you focus on, and your decisions are made around that, then that's what will happen. But if that's not your focus, I mean, I've mentioned before about the guy, the family friend of ours, that, you know, he had two young kids, and he was pretty happy doing what he was doing, and then the company sent him to Singapore for 5 years or something. See you later. And his kids were like 8 or 10 or something like that. The company just said, go to Singapore. And he really didn't want to go. He wanted to stay here with his kids and his wife. And they had to stay here for their own reasons. They had to stay here, and he just went. And that's not, I've got a few of those stories. There's another guy I used to do Kudo with, and his company sent him to South Korea. That sort of stuff. We had another family that we know, the husband got sent to Tokyo to work, and that meant that he'd come home like once a month or something. He'd come back from Tokyo and hang out at the house for the weekend. You know, in a lot of countries, we just say, no way. You know, I'm not giving up my children's childhood to go and work somewhere else for my career or for my company. I'm going to quit. I'm going to stay here or I'm going to quit. You know, and that's what we do. Whereas they wouldn't do that here. That'd be considered as selfish and childish, and, you know what they do. They've got to do what's best for the company or for the family. That's what they see that as well, is that for them to have a good career and progress through the company, they need to do what the company says, and if that means being away from their family for 5 years, that's what they do. And he'd think that was normal, and his wife would think that was normal, and everybody'd think that was normal, you know? Whereas a lot of us can't even imagine. There'd be no amount of money that would get me to leave my kids for 5 years, no way in the world, but for them it's perfectly normal, you know? So, you know, it's just, when you weigh up all these things and another 100 things that I haven't included, that I haven't mentioned, that, you know, when you weigh all that up, that's why I hadn't heard about the happiness survey thing, the happiness report thing, until this guy mentioned it. But all I knew was what he'd written, that Japan came in 55th, and I had zero reaction to it. It was just no surprise at all. No surprise at all. You know, which is a shame, because it's a wonderful place to live, but it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. It's the way that society is. It might change in the future. You know, slowly we're seeing some modern ideas, you know, about harassment and that sort of thing. Slowly they're starting to talk about things like that. It's not changing anything, they're just talking about it, but slowly some modern ideas about, you know, harassment not being a good thing and that sort of thing, slowly those ideas are coming in. So probably sometime in the future there'll be some talk of happiness. They'll give it some Japanglish name like selfu happy or something like that. They'll call it something like that, selfu happy, and then it'll become a sort of a more mainstream idea that we should think about our happiness, and then it'll slowly catch on. But, you know, I wouldn't hold my breath on that happening in the next 20 years, you know, because it's just the society here, you know, it doesn't change. Some new ideas will come and they'll talk about new ideas, but that, you know, it's like the harassment thing. They do talk about that more now. We showed you a poster that was up on a wall in a family restaurant. Don't hassle the staff. You know, you do hear talk about it now a bit more, but the reality is it hasn't really changed. You know, it's just stuff like it doesn't change, which some people say that's great because Japan's a wonderful place and it's good if it doesn't change. That's true. There's that aspect to it. But the other aspect of it is, this is what happens. And then, of course, the result of the extreme example of this not caring about happiness thing, or not being aware of happiness thing, is 30,000 suicides a year, right? People that just get to a point. Because again, you know, if you're in another country outside Japan and you're really unhappy in your job, and you said to your friends and family, I'm really not happy in my job, it's really getting me down, they'd say quit, wouldn't they? Oh, quit, you've got to look after yourself first, you've got to be happy, you know, quit your job, don't worry about it, get another job. But here, they'd say, gembare, 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 you know, try your best, gembare, 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 and they push, and eventually the person suicides. So, it happened, one of my wife's uncles, that's what happened. They just kept telling him to gembare, that's what they do, and they do it with high school students. There's a terrible amount of suicides amongst high school students for the same reason. You know, they're not coping, and everyone around them, their teachers and their family and their friends and everybody just keeps saying gembare, gembare, gembare. And again, the gembare thing, the do your best thing, is a good thing most of the time, But once people reach their limits, and that's all you keep saying to them, no wonder there's 30,000 suicides a year. They feel like there's no way out. Everybody around them is just telling them to try harder. You know, they're at their limit. They can't try anymore, and everybody's just telling them to try harder. So, you know, that's the extreme example. That's a bit of a depressing example, sorry guys, but it's true. That's at the extreme, you know. So when you consider that's at the extreme, just the normal person here, you ask them if they're happy in their life, and they just say, "Futsu," you know, normal, it's okay. Well, no surprises there, is there? So, 55th in the world for happiness, yeah, no surprises there at all. Apparently it's down. The reports, I sort of searched a bit to find out a bit more about it, and it said it continues to fall, right? Which is a lot of the stuff is like that. The English ability continues to fall too, and because they don't do anything about any of these things, right? They'll talk about them now and again, but they'll continue to go down, and it won't surprise me if it continues to go down. You know, why wouldn't it? Nothing's changing. You know, don't change anything. It's not going to improve if you don't change anything. It's just the way it is, you know. Anyway, that's why I didn't try and answer that guy in the comment section. How many words would that have been? That would have been a long comment. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's be happy. Don't worry, be happy now. More videos coming soon.